Hey guys, in this video I'll be ranking Phil Heath's 7 Olympia winning versions from worst to best. Phil is definitely my favorite bodybuilder from the 2010s era, and I thought that this would make for a fun video for those Phil Heath fans out there. While the judging will become more and more subjective when it comes to, the most competitive best versions of Phil, I will still try my best to articulate my rankings for each version. Which version do you think is Phil's all-time best ever? Let me know in the comments down below, and let's get into the video. Starting off with, in my opinion, Phil Heath's least impressive winning package, and that would be his 2014 version. Before anyone comes at me saying that I'm wrong, remember that this is, very subjective, and I'll explain my reasoning. Number one, and the biggest factor, is his extremely bloated midsection in poses like the front double, front lat spread, and ab and thigh. It was extremely washed out and protruded like crazy, a complete 180 from the year prior. Moreover, Phil wasn't supremely conditioned and dug out in the hamstrings like in other years, where the gut was still an issue, which further lends to this being a, very, mediocre package, I'd say. While he still looked bubbly, full, and 3D compared to his other versions, I just don't see the appeal. Overall, Phil still looked great from behind and from the side, and no real winning version would be bad, but relative to his other looks, this was the worst. Next is Phil's second worst year for the gut, being 2017. While his abs were more visibly defined in the frontal poses and there wasn't any significant bloating or inflammation, the distension and asymmetries were abundant. I'd argue that the midsection looked just as bad in 2017 as it did in 2014, with the additional injuries becoming more and more apparent. That said, this version does have a key attribute that 2014 lacked, being stellar, grainy, rock-solid condition. This might arguably be Phil's best winning condition ever, and on top of that, his back, arms, and legs were at their all-time best as well. So much size, thickness, and fullness coupled with phenomenal detail and definition, which allowed him to handily beat the larger, more shapely, yet less separated Big Ramy. In my opinion, apart from the waist, this was the best, most developed Phil to ever set foot on stage and win, bringing a world-class physique to the stage. After the last two physiques, it becomes more and more challenging to place the middle-of-the-pack standard Phils. That said, I think that 2016 is the one that comes to mind for this place. By no means is this a bad version, since his midsection was in check, and he was as full as a house and conditioned to a T. However, his lines and posing took a hit. Look, by bodybuilding standards, this physique would have won every Olympia from 2011 to now, which tells you that it must have been a top-tier package. That being said, look at him in poses like the front double and ab and thigh, and you can notice that he takes a more scrunched, closed-in approach to these other frontal poses. He becomes way less aesthetic from even a year prior, and appears more closed off and less confident in these poses. This might seem like a really nitpicky thing, however, like I said, this is one of Phil's best from the side and rear, so you've got to look at the finer details to really discern any real differences. Here we have, in my opinion, Phil's most underrated version and one of my all-time favorites of his looks, being 2015. Phil had received heavy criticism from the year prior with his gut, so in 2015 he came in a bit flatter but razor sharp and with significantly improved lines. Just look at him in any frontal pose and tell me that he isn't reminiscent of 2011 in that waist. His abs had yet to separate and his waist was in perfect proportion, and his entire physique still showcased that bubbly 3D quality he was known for. Although he might not have been nearly as full as, let's say, 2013, his muscles still appeared bursting with size and rippled with additional detail. There really isn't much else to be said, since from behind his trademark size and condition were fully displayed and his shape and symmetry were at their all-time best for the last time. All things considered, Phil presented a really good package reminiscent of his prime in the midsection, and I feel as though he doesn't get nearly as much credit for it. Alright, 2012 is up next, being a rather forgettable yet extremely impressive version. Many set this version aside due to it being in between two of his best looks ever, as well as for it not having a really freaky attribute. For example, 2011 was super shredded, aesthetic, and shapely, while 2013 was the best combination of fullness and shape that we've ever seen of Phil. 2012 is a bit of a middle ground between the two, combining world-class conditioning with supreme fullness to create a, rather good balance. He still lacked that muscle maturity and graininess in the back and the hamstrings of 2015, let's say, and onward from then. However, that youthful look added to his freaky bubbliness and round muscle bellies. I'll admit that this version isn't up there with my personal favorites of his. However, there is no denying that the lines were in check, his development was on point, and his conditioning was still above the competition. If bias and subjectivity were more of a factor, I'd probably switch 2015 and 2012's ranks. However, objectively, 2012's midsection and fullness were still better. In second place is Phil's 2013 physique, a placing I'm sure will stir up some controversy. While many people would place this version in their number one spot, there is one flaw that makes all the difference. Now, I've been referring to this version as the fullest Phil ever, and for good reason, as Phil was bursting full and round all over. His conditioning was near the best of his career, while simultaneously being the biggest he's ever looked. This fullness came at a cost though, almost completely altering his midsection from the year prior. His midsection appeared a bit washed out in the abs, nothing near the levels of 2014, however this definitely threw off his flow somewhat. Now, from an objective standpoint, this version of Phil would probably win any head-to-head matchup and be the best of the best for the bodybuilding stage, which is the main argument people make for this being his best version. While I do agree that 2013 Phil has the best chance against a guy like 03 Ronnie or 1993 Dorian, relative to his other physiques, I feel like it's not the prettiest, most shapely, and it doesn't combine everything perfectly. Also, this was the year where his posing became a bit cramped and uncomfortable looking, which is another small yet visible flaw on his resume. While I can see the argument for this package being the best for the stage, I still believe that the next version is his best compared to all of his other wins. You probably guessed it, or at least guessed closely from the start, as 2011 Phil is my pick for the best Phil Heath ever. Look, he wasn't the biggest or the most full, however, I'm sure out of all the versions, this is the most legendary one. He had the smallest waist out of all his winning versions, and the proportions were near perfect for his frame. Poses like the front double and the front lat spread weren't just world-class for the muscular development, but also for his shape and posing execution. He had finally reached the point in his career where his muscularity was coming into its own, his lines were still in check, and he found and nailed the condition. Moreover, the lighting and tan were, in my opinion, the best out of his winning years, which further complemented the symmetry and flow that was unique to this win. I believe that this is a peak perfection of a physique, sort of like Ronnie in 1999 or Dorian in 1993, where there are no injuries and everything is great. Think about it, Ronnie in 2003 might have been bigger, and Dorian in 1995 may have had a better back and more mass. However, their best versions were when they were smaller but had that quality and zero imperfections. 2011 ticks that box for me, being perfect in every aspect with that stellar midsection framing everything perfectly. Anyways guys, let me know what your rankings would be in the comments below. If you enjoyed, a like and sub would be awesome, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.